Returning now to the West Bank, where dozens of bereaved Israeli families are suing the Palestinian Authority. Some of these families have loved ones who were killed at the Nova Music Festival on October 7th or were murdered in recent terror attacks in the West Bank and Israel. And they filed a claim with the Jerusalem District Court asking for around $55 million from the Palestinian Authority for supporting and encouraging terrorism against citizens of the state of Israel, while also rewarding terrorists with money by paying perpetrators and their families. Now, this is the first lawsuit by victims of terrorism that has been filed since Israel passed a new law back in March, which is aimed at compensating victims of terror. Now, this law states that victims will be able to sue those who transfer funding to pay for terrorism and encourage attacks by paying salaries to terrorists. And it also indicates that bereaved families are eligible for up to $3 million in compensation. I'd like to turn back to our correspondents in the studio. All right, so first of all, break down what this lawsuit contains and how many families are actually involved in it.
When we're talking about the families, we're talking about dozens of families right now, and on everyone's forefront, it's definitely those that are victims from October 7th, the Nova Music Festival, but it does include families that are victims from previous terror attacks from the past several years as well. So these dozens of families are taking advantage of this newly signed law, as you mentioned, in March. This is the first use of this law as well, where they're actually able to go after the people who fund this terrorism. And so that's what's important to note right now when you're taking a look at a lot of the comments that are coming around surrounding this lawsuit. Those who are prosecuting the case say that this is important because while the soldiers right now are inside Gaza fighting the war on terrorism firsthand, this is a completely separate battle inside the courtroom to stop the funding of terrorism. And this is certainly, with this new law, just another step that Israel is trying to take to go after the funding and make sure that the terror organizations, right now they're pinpointing the Palestinian Authority, can't continue to fund and kind of have this blood for money type tactic and policy in place.
Right. So, of course, we're talking about the pay for slay methodology that we often hear about here in Israel, something that the Israeli government has really taken aim at with this law specifically. Now, Hamas carried out the October 7th atrocities against Israel. Obviously, not all of the families who are involved in this lawsuit lost loved ones specifically on that day, but why are some of those victims' families also targeting the Palestinian Authority as being responsible?
Because it sees the Palestinian Authority as the main official address for any claims against Palestinian people. First of all, as Nicole mentioned, this is not just for for terror attacks carried out since October 7th. This is also before, so this is a bundle of lawsuits. But the post-October or the October 7th victims, they see the Palestinian Authority as a key element in years-long incitement, general support for terror, even if they didn't pay the families of the October 7th terrorists, which I think, according to this lawsuit, they allude to that. This policy, this pay for slay policy, that you can get up to $400 per month if you've carried out. If you've been incarcerated for up to 3 years, if that's your sentence, and if you have a sentence of 30 years, 30 years or more, your family gets $3,400 every month. Now, this is perhaps the main source of for criticism against the PA, also from Israel. There's a lot of criticism for this policy. I will say that I've talked to Palestinian officials, including the former Minister for Prisoners, and he painted a more complex image. He said, if we don't pay these families to support them, to keep their heads afloat, they will either go immediately to Hamas or just be in the streets and then eventually end up being part of Hamas. So that's what the Palestinian Authority says. At least you can debate the validity of that claim, but at the end of the day, we have this very controversial policy that is now moving to the courts. not from the state of Israel, but by Israelis.
All right, so final question here, very quick answer, Nicole. How likely are these families to actually win this case, and who's prosecuting ultimately?
It's a great question, how likely, and I think the fact that this is also the first time this new law is being put in place, it kind of determines, and so it's up in the air right now, and who's really liable to, even let's say this lawsuit does go through, who's liable to make sure that the Palestinian Authority then does pay for each of these families. We're talking 10 million shekels, which is, I think, equivalent to $2.6 million for a family that's lost a relative that was murdered by a terror attack, another $5 million for those with a family member who was injured. So we're talking a very large chunk of cash right now, very well deserved from these family members, but how exactly it's going to play out in the courts, I think could be very interesting to tell, and then just set the precedent for how this law is used in the future as well.